Hey everyone, welcome back to K-Korner, the channel where we dive into the wild world of entitled people and their unbelievable stories. Hope you enjoy it, and without further ado, let's go. I'm getting married in August to my partner of almost 15 years. We have a kid together and recently bought a house with a yard, so we decided to go to City Hall on our anniversary and tie the knot. We are simple people, so we decided on a simple party, backyard barbecue. That way, we don't have to rent a place or pay through the nose for fancy food. We're providing pasta salad, potatoes, all the veggies, and some basic meat, but we asked everyone to bring their own meats or veggie burger or whatever, so we can make a giant buffet. A friend of ours is bringing his DJ stuff, and we're going to dance for a bit. I made my own dress in a nice blue fabric. Our kiddo got to pick our sparkly shoes and a sparkly dress. Partner went to Zara for a suit. We made our own invites. Kid made a cute drawing of us that I used in Canva, and decorations. Fun, right? Enter Aunt W. She's my father's sister. We see her once or twice a year at Christmas and the occasional family boo-boo. They don't like her or her entitled son. We sent her our invite and she went to my parents to ask if we were too poor for a real wedding. Why is it not fancy? It's not normal. Why is it so sad? She's never heard of a wedding where people bring their own food. Can't my parents pay for a real wedding? Turns out she's discussed this with my entire side of the family by phone, and everyone agrees it's sad. My parents called me to tell me about the conversation. They thought it hysterical and wacky. So I called her to ask why she can talk to me if she cares so much. She denied it at first, then told me everyone agrees it's too sad to attend, and then told me my grandparents and her family aren't coming. I was also told she was ready to give us a very lavish gift, but now just one. We explicitly stated no gifts and suggested people donate to a local charity instead. We were livid at first. How dare she? She also dragged the rest of the family along and made my grandparents not come either. We gave it some thought, and we think her logic is, her son got married 5 or 6 years ago with all the bells and whistles, the glitz and glam, fancy party. We attended, it was boring as F, and now Aunt feels she also deserves a fancy party to attend. Like we were going to turn around and spend $15,000 or more just because someone we see once a year thinks we are poor or sad. I am a customer services manager for a very large entertainment broadband company. Part of my job is listening to calls raised off to by my agents in relations to complaints, etc. One of my agents had a customer on the line going mental about her daughter's phone and broadband services being restricted for not paying. Customer claims the last person she spoke to said her bill would be cleared and she didn't have to pay. So I listened to that call and the customer is awful from the get-go. Making fun of the advisor's name, the name being Merlin, she was making jokes about her being a wizard and how stupid her name was mainly. Shouting at her for over an hour about how we've committed fraud because we won't read her daughter's bank details out on the call to her. She then starts going mad when the advisor tells her we couldn't take payment because 3 different credit cards were declined on the account in 3 different months. Abuse goes on for 145 minds, and I feel so bad for the advisor at this point. Customer starts going mental that her daughter never has credit cards. Again, that we've committed fraud and she's coming to the agent's call center to find her. When the agent asks how we could possibly have committed fraud, the customer puts her foot in it, goes into a rage, and then tells her she let her daughter, who's only 17, go into the store and take the broadband contract with us, and the customer knew she had to be over 18. How it was our fault and blah blah for not doing our checks and so on. Her daughter came on the line screaming just as bad as her too. Our customers need to be 18 to have contracts with us. We run basic debt checks to see if they have defaulted accounts with us, but nothing more. After raising the account off to the fraud team, I had the pleasure of calling them back to tell them they were canceled with immediate effect. Of course, she started screaming at me until I told her I wasn't here to be screamed at. It clearly wasn't up for discussion, and that I'd be hanging up. If she'd been nice and not acted like she was on a pedestal and untouchable, then the services wouldn't have been canceled. Don't you love when loudmouth Karens shoot themselves in the foot? Edit. To save everyone slating me about how crap my company and management style is. This call I was listening to wasn't my agent. It was 3 days before my agent. My company have strict policies around abuse, in which you warn the customer you'll hang up for abuse. If they show signs of it, and de-escalation doesn't work. I'm happy to speak to abusive customers so my people don't have to. For whatever reason, this poor agent dealt with the call without changing up. She was just that good at her job, she mustn't have really cared. Hello, I've been a long-time lurker on this sub, but today I actually encountered one of these people. This whole Karen thing, it seemed like it wouldn't happen in my country, but I was proven wrong this morning. They do exist everywhere, I guess. Also, FYI, because I'm a huge ball of anxiety and introvertedness, which is the reason for my poor handling of the situation, and also the reason I really can't remember the whole encounter. So I, 22F, live in Istanbul, and always ride the subway to my college. Although, not to brag, but yes, I would like to brag. I go to a good college. The line I have to use to get to the campus is, in our Istanbul locales, terms, goes through most of the not-so-great parts of the city. And it is crowded, very crowded in the mornings. Also, it is a long ride, and there are very few seats in the trains. It's mostly standing space. So as usual, I was waiting in line to board, and as frequent train subway users would know, there are spots for people who are gonna board to wait, and you leave the middle space empty as a courtesy so that others can leave the train easily. Now, we are not Japan, so nobody ever lines up perfectly here, but also mostly we have the basic decency to stand, or pile up, let's say, at the right spots to make boarding and leaving easier. I was second in line when this lady pulled up, and there was 5 minutes till the next train. She stood right in the middle where people are supposed to get out. This is annoying since it's the first and last stop of the line, so if we don't let others empty the train, we can't get in ourselves. But I kept quiet since I don't want to start shit and get myself in trouble. So the train pulled up and she immediately cut in front of me and pushed me aside violently. People are trying to exit. She's blocking the way and pushing me butt. Because it's so crowded I have nowhere to go, so I push her back. She instantly started screaming, which is unnecessary because we can board at this point, and she already has won a spot to sit and so have I. Now, a fact about me is I'm ridiculously tall, 180, 1'5'11", easily a head taller than this country's height average for women. She's already sat down, but she's yelling and talking shit. Meanwhile, I'm getting mad for the second. She screams at me saying, "A camel has height, too, but you still don't have shit on me." A bad translation for a very insulting idiom to tall people in my language. Screams demanding to know how old I am, B, I have no respect for my elders, and I'm just a teenager. At this point, I'm seeing red. I should have handled this better, I know, but I'm very socially inexperienced and also probably have undiagnosed anger management issues. I do hit myself or other things when I'm mad. But she was refusing to shut up and still yelling, insulting, complaining how she was older and I was just a child and yada yada. So I get up and yell at her back to shut the hell up, and she immediately gets up like she was waiting for it. Gets up in my face as I yell at her to cut it out and that she cut in and pushed me first, and all she's saying is that she is older and I'm just a teenager. She then pushed me back and slammed me to the bars. For someone the height of a turd, another idiom as a diss from us, but to short people this time, Leo. She had crazy strength, or maybe I'm weak-eyed. Short people freak me out. A couple of people broke us apart and I hit a guy that got between us. I seriously felt so bad, had a panic attack about this later on. The guy who witnessed saw how she cut in and pushed me. She's now yelling at him saying, "Are you seeing this? Are you seeing this?" Like, yes, Karen, he is seeing through your lies. We sit back down at this point, but she is still repeating herself and screaming. And we get back up a few more times where she tries to throw hands. Other people are protesting at this point, yelling at both of us to stew, and it's too early in the morning for it. Also, the train has arrived at the next stop, so some people leave and call security. I have called her an ancient whore at some point, which is also the reason she is screaming like a banshee. Again, I'm not proud of how I handled things, which is why I had a panic attack because I was so mad at myself. I had texted my mom during all of it, and she immediately called and tried her best to calm me down and told me to switch to a different wagon, and I did. She was screaming at me, "Where the hell are you going? Get back here," while people kept telling her to stew. So, yeah, that was my morning. Cried all the way to school and had multiple panic attacks and missed my class, computer sciences and engineering if anyone's interested. I love my major, but it's very tiring. And now I'm writing this. I hate saying this, BC people lost jobs. Economy crashed. It was hard for a lot of people and many other bad stuff happened, but I really loved how I could stay inside during the pandemic BC shit. like this didn't have to happen. Enjoying the stories yet? If you do, please subscribe, like, and comment. I'm 26 male, and am both autistic and have severe PTSD from some childhood trauma caused by both of my parents that I really don't want to get into. I'm on a few different medications for depression and migraines and have to live in Section 8 housing that I just moved into a few months ago after being on the waiting list for years. I don't like being touched or loud noises, and I certainly don't like seeing anyone take my stuff. When I moved to the city for the Section 8 housing, I'd been gifted a brand new Razor Kick scooter by a friend to get around my new area with. And I love it. It's black and made a bit sturdier than typical ones for an adult to ride and has bigger wheels. It also isn't sold in the local stores, but they have similar-looking ones in the bike department. And obviously, I don't just leave it outside when I go into a store. I fold it up and put it in my cart while shopping. I look kind of twitchy, so most people leave me alone. And I'm just fine with that, but touch me without consent or take my stuff and be ready for a massive freakout. I went down the canned food aisle and started browsing the chunky soup. When I picked what I'd wanted and put the cans in the cart, I noticed my scooter was gone. And there was a woman with a kid fast walking away while carrying it. I shouted after them to return my scooter, but they ignored me, so I abandoned my cart to give chase. When I caught up to the lady and the kid, I tried to take my scooter back, and the kid screamed so loud my eardrums felt like they were going to pop. And the Karen mom shoved down while yelling something I didn't hear because my ears were ringing and my brain just stopped working for a moment. A manager noticed the commotion and came to see what the trouble was. I didn't even get a chance to speak when the Karen mom started calling me a creep and was demanding I be thrown out. I kept trying to explain what really happened, but the Karen just kept yelling over me. We were separated and I was made to sit in an office. The manager approached me and I asked him where my scooter was, and he admonished me and said it was sold to the Karen, and I shouldn't have tried to take it from the kid when they were just trying to buy it from the store. Then he pointed out he had to give the Karen a discount just because of the situation. I understandably freaked out and told him that the Karen had taken my scooter that I came into the store with, and it wasn't sold there. The manager just looked confused and I nearly broke down. Then I pulled my phone out and showed him a picture a friend had taken of me with the scooter right after I'd gotten it. The next thing I knew, he was running out of the room. And when he finally came back, he said that the Karen was long gone. I pulled out my phone back out and started frantically calling the police. The manager actually tried to stop me by putting his hand over my phone, and I freaked out from him touching me. He backed off because I'd nearly kicked him and was panicking and saying he'd buy me another scooter from the store. I told him that my scooter was expensive and didn't come from their store, and I wanted mine back. Well, it turned out I had managed to dial 911 because the police were already listening in on the line and the operator was trying to get my attention. I just told them to send someone over because my property had been stolen. I had to wait for another hour at least while police showed up and then went through the CCTV footage. It clearly showed me entering the store with the scooter and showed the Karen and her crotch goblin taking it from my cart, and the mess that followed when I tried to get it back. I wanted my scooter back and police had to find the Karen from the camera footage of the parking lot. They found her address by running her plate number they got from the camera footage, and I got to ride in the back of a police car while we went to her apartment. The officer knocked on her door, and I didn't hear the situation because I was still sitting in the back of the car with the windows closed. But the Karen mom looked really angry and eventually brought out the scooter after some back and forth. She practically had to wring it out of her kid's hands. I got let out of the car and they asked me if I wanted to press charges for assault because the mother had shoved me. She looked ghost white when I said I did want that. But the Karen started crying and begging me. She said that she honestly thought it was something the store was selling and it was her kid's birthday. I yelled that didn't excuse her stealing from someone else's cart, let alone from a legally disabled man. Her kid was also loudly crying and my ears were hurting again. So I said I wouldn't press charges on her if she didn't come near me or my stuff again. But I wanted something done about the manager at the store for letting this happen. And I was ready to ride my scooter all the way back there. But the police convinced me that it'd be better if I just went home and calmed down. I later learned on my next visit to the store a couple days later that manager was fired over what happened because he already had a few complaints against him and didn't bother to check that the scooter wasn't one of theirs. And the store gave the Karen and her kid a replacement Razor scooter that they had in stock because she'd already paid for one. But she was also banned for 6 months from the store for shoving me and stealing my property. I was also given a $50 gift card for some free groceries, since I wasn't able to buy anything the day that mess happened. Now, every time I go into that store, a few of the employees know me by name, and one actually told a random kid to leave me alone when he asked about my scooter. I certainly keep a better eye at it now, too. I've also since added a name tag on the underside of the scooter with my full name on it, just in case this happens again. Me, 24 male. My mother, 50 female. My brother, 23 male. My sister, 30 female. Cheating stepdad, 45 male. Chris stepdad's coworker, 25 female. Betty the other woman, 40 female. Dirty the other woman, 40 female. This may be a long one. Apologies in advance. I moved in with my mom after her marriage of 25 years with my bio dad was ended. He was a manipulative hole, but that's another story. Shortly after the divorce, my mom introduced me to her boyfriend at the time, Chris. Now, my mom worked as a corrections officer at the county jail. The boyfriend was a former inmate, in for a Dewey. That should have been the first red flag, but my mom was grieving a long marriage, and I didn't want to push the subject. Chris seemed to make her happy, and that was enough for me. Me, Bro, and Sis all moved in with Mom and Chris, and we seemed to get along okay. Chris and I bonded a bit over our love of video games, and all seemed well. That is, until 2017. Due to Chris's prior Dewey, he had to go in regularly for probationary checkups at the courthouse. One day he didn't return, and we got a little worried. We then received a phone call from him, from Texas. Turns out, when he arrived at the courthouse that day, he was jumped by the FBI. His family from Texas was implicated on a number of gang and drug-related crimes, and due to a situation where he was in a vehicle during a drug handoff, he was on the hook as well. He ended up agreeing to testify against his family members in exchange for a shorter sentence and allowed to be out of prison before the trial. My mom was distraught, and over the course of many phone calls over a year, they worked out their marriage plans when he returned. His store owner at the DK he worked at allowed him to come back as well, back to his store manager position. Soon after, the drinking started. Now, obviously, because of his Dewey, Chris was clearly no stranger to drinking. He began to drink more and more, to the point where he was consuming half a 24-pack of beer a day. Chris was a mean drunk. He regularly started fights when wasted, and while they never got physical, he wasn't exactly kind with his words. My mom enabled his behavior for several years, saying the stress was getting to him from work and from the upcoming trial. Finally, after several years, my mom had enough. Chris came home extremely drunk one night, and my mom confronted him. She asked if he'd been drinking, and when he didn't deny it, she kicked him out. He went to live with a friend temporarily. The next morning, Mom asked us to help gather a few of his essentials so that he didn't have to re-enter the home until he was sober. While we were gathering his things, we heard a knock at the front door. We opened it to find Betty, one of Chris's co-workers and someone I went to high school with. She told my mom she had something important to share. After sitting my mom down and telling her not to share where she got the info from, Betty told my mom about how Chris was cheating on my mom with Darla. How he regularly had Darla perform sexual acts in and around his workplace. How Betty had caught them, and how Chris told her that if she ever told my mom, he'd fire her. He was the store manager. And finally, how Darla was pregnant. My mom was angry. After the initial shock wore off, she told us to round up all of Chris's things and to dump it outside. We took everything of his out of the house and tossed it all in the alley behind our house. Chris had no reason or ability to return to the house. It was rented, with only my mom on the paperwork, so no issues there. In the meantime, she called and confronted him. He confessed to the entire affair, and that he was happy Darla was pregnant because that meant he'd finally have a child of his own. Mom refused to have more kids. We three were massive strains on her body. She likely wouldn't survive anymore. He refused to apologize for any of his actions. My mom arranged for him to collect his items from the alley, with an officer present, and he left our lives. The revenge. Now, my mom clearly wanted to dust her hands of him and move on. She was already quite emotional from the whole ordeal and wanted nothing more from him. But Sis Bro and I had other ideas. First, we called his workplace. Duque operates as an independently owned franchise, and the owner of this branch owns several branches in the area. He was also a good friend. We informed him of the sexual acts being performed on the premises, and he went the processes of getting Chris booted from his position and barred him from any of the branches in the area. Finally, Betty got his position after he left, and now runs a tight and clean ship. Chris no longer had a job or a place to live, and so went to live with Darla in a town about an hour away. We found out that he started working at another daycare in that town, and informed the owner of that location of the situation. It took significantly longer due to there being no current indecent actions occurring there, but eventually he lost that job too. Soon after, Chris began driving around our neighborhood, seemingly stalking my mom and our family, probably because of his job loss. Now, due to the whole situation in Texas, he never had his probation lifted for his DUI, and thus still did not have a license. He never had to drive when he lived with us, since work was local and we could drive him as needed. But here was clearly driving around by himself when he shouldn't be. We contacted the police and informed them about Darla's vehicle in our neighborhood, and that we believe Chris was driving it without a license. We told them to pull over the vehicle next time they see it, as it would likely be driving again. Sure enough, a few weeks later, we were told that Chris indeed was pulled over and sent back to the local jail for driving without a license, and while intoxicated. The police also did a search of the home he was staying at and found several guns at the premises. Since he was a felon, he was not legally allowed to have weaponry on the premises, meaning there was more jail time tacked on. By the time his jail time had finished, it was just in time for him to be sent back to incarceration in Texas for the trial. Chris's son was born while Chris was in prison. Darla evidently realized what an absolute ass Chris was and cut ties with him while he was in prison. During his prison time, Chris started sending tons of letters to my mom, stating how sorry he was, pleading to take him back and ranting about how it wasn't his fault, all in the same letter, mind you. Mom burnt every one of them. We moved on, moving out of state. Chris evidently got out of prison some years ago and now lives in Kansas, struggling and fighting child support, which Darla sued him for. Mom now has a new boyfriend who treats her right and cares a lot more than Chris ever did. Bro and sis moved on and out, and I still live with Mom, assisting her with the newly purchased home that we've been renovating. Life's looking okay. I was reminded of this by a chat with a coworker about cheaters and thought to post it here for others to enjoy. Here's a very long story, so I'm going to divide it into two parts. Part 1. I decided to write this following an argument that finally happened a few days ago, specifically on December 15, though it's taken some time to write. There's a lot to unpack, so I'll set it into 3 sections: backstory, incident, and argument. For privacy, people will either have fake names or be referred to by relation. Side note, I find it annoying when people abbreviate things like mum, dad. Just write the extra letters. Anyway, onwards. It's very long, but there's a lot to go through, and I need to vent because I'm still so frustrated this happened. All talk of family members, cousins, grandparents, etc. will be on my dad's paternal side, EAG. Dad's grandmother is my father's father's mother, grandpa is my father's father. While this is written from my perspective, the entitled parent narcissist here is my paternal grandfather. My own dad has always been amazing and is my best friend to this day. He also gave me permission to post this from my point of view. It's long, but this is just the tip of the iceberg. That story. As I mentioned, Dad is my best friend. I'm in my late 20s and live with him by choice. Even if we were millionaires, I'd still live with him. I live with my dad, younger brother, and fiancé. We're a very close unit. When I see other stories, I realize how truly lucky I am. Even my fiancé says my dad has been a better dad to her than her own father. For Dad, however, growing up was very different. In a nutshell, his father was incredibly emotionally, and often physically, abusive. There are many incidents from Dad's childhood that are shocking, and his story is just one horrendous example. The main theme has been rejection by his father's side of the family. My grandpa, his parents, siblings, and their offspring all come from a small village in Yorkshire. My dad, however, was born in Kent, in the south of England. If you're unaware of the north-south divide in England, just know that some people from Yorkshire are incredibly proud of being from Yorkshire and often tell stories and jokes about how Yorkshire is superior to the rest of the UK. For my extended family, their loyalty towards Yorkshire was excessive, to say the least. Unfortunately for Dad, this manifested as bullying. Every school holiday, Christmas, even the odd weekend, Dad was forced to go up to Yorkshire to visit his paternal family, grandparents, cousins, etc. There, he was essentially the butt of every joke. They would bully him relentlessly, making fun of everything he did and everything he was. Much of it was about being from the South, laughing at his accent, making fun of him for being different, always looking for things to mock, just to satisfy this strange superiority complex they had. We argue a lot of this is Grandpa's fault. After all, if he wanted a son with a northern accent, why didn't he stay in the north? To show how far they would go, if Dad went to the corner shop as a kid to buy sweets or comic, the local kids would shout abuse at him. This was brushed off, as the village only had a tiny handful of families. Dad mentioned the kids in a nearby town were nice and played with him, but most of the time he was in the village dealing with this abuse. The main culprit of the bullying, besides my grandfather, was Dad's grandmother, who constantly criticized him and compared him unfavorably to his cousins. She was cruel and manipulative, and my grandpa, being a mummy's boy, wouldn't hear a word against her. Everything she did was perfect, and the constant bullying was either downplayed or denied. If Dad spoke up about the bullying, even decades later, he was shouted down and told to shut up about it, or lied to about what really happened. One of Grandpa's main emotional abuse tactics was, and still is, gaslighting to the nth degree. He would say something, then quickly lie about it, pretending whoever heard it didn't hear him right or didn't remember properly. He would also feign forgetfulness to avoid guilt when the abuse was addressed. Serious conversations about pain and healing were usually brushed off with "don't be stupid," even when approached gently. Grandpa is also very stubborn, dictatorial, and manipulative. His opinions are always right, and he deliberately brings up contentious topics just to state his opinion and then shut down any dissent, often shouting others down. This could be about big issues like politics or mundane things like food. When we said we didn't like Yorkshire toasted tea cakes, he claimed we didn't make them right. Nothing from Yorkshire could be bad, so clearly we were too incompetent to use a toaster. This was his logic for everything. Due to Grandpa's nature, being hard-headed, stubborn, and dismissive, he's pushed away nearly everyone in his life. He has few friends, alienated his co-workers with his control freak tendencies, and shows no compassion for anyone different from him. The only people who visit him, besides the carers he needs due to his age, are us. Dad's brother sees him only once a year at Christmas, if that, and last year he went alone without his wife and daughter. Dad tries to see him every few weeks, despite the emotional abuse, just to be a good son. It takes Dad about 2 hours to drive there and 2 hours back, if traffic is good. Even when Grandpa was younger and healthier, the family in Yorkshire never visited him in the South and still haven't. It was always Grandpa, Grandma, Dad, and his brother who went up to Yorkshire. Grandpa has always been a liar. He constantly embellishes stories, changes situations, or outright denies doing something seconds after he did it. Dad, on the other hand, has always been honest. I can't recall a single time Dad has been dishonest with me, except for nice surprises like last year, when he suggested I look for a Nintendo Switch in the January sales, only to surprise me with one for Christmas. Another culprit of the bullying was Dad's oldest cousin, Mary. As the eldest, Mary was perfect in their grandmother's eyes, and thus exempt from her cruelty. She relished in the bullying. Despite being older, she didn't care that she was picking on a younger child. For her and many other family members, Dad existed solely to be ridiculed during family visits. It's important to note that Grandpa never defended Dad. When they bullied Dad, Grandpa joined in, often instigating it by pointing out things about Dad to mock. He always took the extended family's side over Dad, insulting him for getting upset. In any dispute, Grandpa would take the other person's side, regardless of who it was or what it was about. If Dad had a minor argument with someone on the way home from school and vented about it, Grandpa would use this as an excuse to flex his debating skills by immediately siding with the other person. It didn't matter who it was or what the dispute was about. Even the most minor issues were Dad's fault because he didn't do X right. When Grandpa enforced the idea that family comes first, Dad always assumed it meant the Yorkshire family, not him and his brother. In contrast, Dad never said the phrase family comes first to me, yet I always put family first because of the relationship we have. Being stubborn, Grandpa refused to hear anything bad about his mother, even when we approached the subject of her abuse gently. I tried to appeal to his empathy, explaining how it had hurt Dad and affected him as a child. His response was to shout, "Well, how would you like it if I assaulted your mother, who passed when I was 12? Of course, there's a massive difference between a grandson addressing familial emotional abuse and a grandfather insulting his late daughter-in-law directly to her son. Note, my mom had her issues, which we've discussed in a healthy way. I recognize she wasn't perfect, but I love and miss her. She was always wonderful to Grandpa and tried to be a good daughter-in-law. Considering that this was Dad's entire childhood until he escaped to university, the relationship between him and his extended family is fractured, and he still carries emotional baggage from the lifelong rejection. Now that the backstory is clear, onto the main incident. In 2016, my grandmother passed away. I was, of course, upset as I liked her, but it was worse for Dad as he had lost his mother. She was 84, but losing a mother is never easy, as I know painfully well. When I was 12 and my little brother was 4, my mother passed away. She was in her early 40s, as was Dad. This was a greatly traumatic event for all of us. Dad had to not only deal with the grief of losing his wife prematurely, but also raise 2 children dealing with the death of their mother and subsequent mental health problems. Fortunately, Dad, being the amazing person he is, has supported me through these issues, even though it was distressing for him. The fact is, my brother and I have never doubted for a second that we are the most important things in Dad's life. I've always felt his pride in me. Since Dad has always been there for me, I want to be there for him whenever he needs it. I knew the funeral would be difficult, not due to bereavement, but because it would take place in Yorkshire. This meant a long drive, facing several childhood bullies and abusers, and dealing with the stress and grief of traveling across the country for a funeral. It started off grim, and Grandpa began his usual nonsense the moment we arrived. For some reason, Grandpa is almost religiously loyal to Tesco. We find it very bizarre. My uncle, Dad's brother, casually mentioned he had been to Morrison's, another supermarket, before arriving at the funeral, to which Grandpa barked, "Your mother hated Morrison's," as if going there before the funeral was disrespectful to her memory. We doubt this was true, as Dad recalls Grandma saying one mildly positive thing about Morrison's. Meanwhile, a cousin promised to come to the funeral, didn't show up, then promised to attend the memorial service, didn't show up again, and this was quickly forgiven and forgotten. If we're honest, we weren't happy with the service Grandma was given. She was an actress in her youth and loved the performing arts, especially A Midsummer Night's Dream. However, rather than a funeral for Grandma, it was one for Grandpa's wife. Grandpa arranged everything, so he was the only one allowed to tell anecdotes, solely ones that made him look good in his career. None of the stories she loved to tell about her youth were shared, and her relatives were upset that in her final goodbye, she only seemed to exist in her role as Grandpa's wife. At the end of the funeral, charity donations are usually taken for a cause the deceased believed in. To add insult to injury, donations were asked to go to Yorkshire Cricket Club, a sport Grandpa likes and a team he supports, unrelated to Grandma. We later opted to get a chair in her local theater inscribed with her name as a fitting memorial due to her love of the arts. Already it felt tense as we noticed the one-sided portrayal of Grandma, but we stayed friendly and polite to keep everything as nice as possible. After all, it was a funeral. We went to the village hall for the wake, where there was a spread. We used the opportunity to be friendly with family members we hadn't seen in years and catch up with small talk. It was going as well as it could given the situation, before Mary came swanning over. To reiterate, Mary is related to Grandpa by blood. She is his niece, and this was at Grandma's wake, whom she is only related to by marriage. Small talk started, which already seemed judgmental and more like an interrogation from Mary. Although she hadn't yet said anything too bad, we continued to answer as politely as possible. However, this wasn't good enough for Mary. Seeing Dad as someone to bully for fun, it didn't take long for it to start again. The funeral was in July and my dad had tanned. Ethnically, we are all white. I've always been jealous of his ability to tan, but unfortunately, I inherited Mom's skin. I burn, then go even whiter underneath. While Dad can sit out in the sun for an hour and be all right, I have to find shade after about 15 minutes or I'll burn. My brother is more like Mom in terms of skin tone, burning but tanning slightly easier than I do. Mary noticed this and felt it was appropriate to say the following joke in a loud, firm, accusatory tone. Dad's name. Why are you so brown and your kids so white? Are they not really yours? Yes, that was her idea of a joke. Mary's idea of humor was to suggest that my father's deceased wife had cheated on him and that he owned 2 children, who mean the world to him, are illegitimate. This was the joke she thought appropriate to make at his mother's funeral. Of course, this is bollocks. Dad is my biological father and my brothers, and there has never been any doubt of this. We look so much like him, there's no chance of doubt. Calling this joke the straw that broke the camel's back understates the gravity of what she said. Though untrue, the joke was incredibly hurtful, not just to Dad, but also to my brother and me. It was another cruel joke at my father's expense, suggesting a break in our family structures. It emphasized the rejection Dad felt from that side of the family, implying we couldn't truly be family if we weren't related to him. There is also the glaringly obvious fact that you don't cut the tension at a funeral by insulting the deceased's family. To Mary, Dad's purpose was to be someone to pick on to make the other family members laugh. This didn't seem to be an issue for her. We didn't answer and walked away, more in shock as we tried to process not only what she said, but the audacity to say it at a funeral. Dad was incredibly distraught, shocked that this would happen even after years of abuse from these people. We talked about it with each other and with friends, needing time to process the emotional toll. After some time, Dad decided it would be best to tell Grandpa what happened and how much pain it caused. He wanted the situation resolved and hoped to give Grandpa the opportunity to be there for him, for once. Dad wanted Grandpa to finally act like a father, defend him, and agree that such a remark, especially at a funeral, was unacceptable. I will provide the second part 2 tomorrow at the last story of the video. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more captivating stories. Share your own experiences, opinions in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay tuned for more epic tales.